Hi, and welcome to the Ionic in 30 webinar. We're going to cover everything that you may need to know about Ionic in roughly 30 minutes or less. But at any point during this, you feel like you've missed something or you just want to go back and watch another section for reference, don't worry, we're going to be sharing the recording of this afterwards. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to use the little Q&A toolbar down below. Add your questions to the queue, and we'll try to get through them at the end of this session. So let's go and introduce your host today, and that is me. But that is not a very friendly face right there, so let's update this photo real quick. Much better. So my name is Mike Hartington. I am the Director of Developer Relations here at Ionic. All that means is that I try to make sure that developers are happy and successful while building Ionic apps. So if there's anything that I can do to help you along your way, please reach out and let me know. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, GitHub, all with the same handle of M Hartington. Let me know your questions, what are your pain points, and potentially what are some future topics that you're interested in hearing in these webinars. I'd love to see what we can do for our community. But let's dive into the meat of this presentation and kind of understand what is Ionic. Now, you might be familiar with Ionic, reason why you signed up here, but maybe you want to share this with a friend, or maybe you want to explain what we do to somebody who's not familiar. Well, in a nutshell, Ionic is a platform for building amazing mobile apps with the power of web technology. We offer you some core building blocks, our Ionic framework, to help you structure your app and build out the UI in a way that feels familiar to web developers. We provide a native platform so that way you can deploy those apps and access native device features right from JavaScript capacitor. And in doing so, we provide a unified CLI that can adapt to the various front end frameworks of today and have you building your apps and then deploying them all from a very streamlined interface, our Ionic CLI. Along the way, if you feel like you need some extra help or extra features, we have some additional services that you can opt into as well. We have a collection of plugins and components for things like authentication, security, that a lot of people use for very sensitive apps. And then a mobile CI/CD platform that is tailor-made for mobile apps specifically, and not just your generalized CI/CD platform. So you can go ahead, have your apps be pre-built, all from a Git commit, and then go ahead and deploy those to get a native binary or have a live update to be deployed to your users, all from our CI/CD platform. And if you're a larger enterprise and you feel like you need a little bit more help, a little bit more of assistance along the way, we have an enterprise support offering that you can take advantage of to help you get along that last little bit of development that you're working on, and maybe you're stuck with something. We can be there to help you figure out your problems and get you over the finish line. Now, Ionic, you might be aware of it, like I said. Maybe you aren't sure how widely it's used or what the impact of Ionic is. Really, we're pretty impactful. We are in the top 10% of apps out there in iOS. So 10% of the App Store in iOS is using Ionic in some degree. And about 15% of the Android apps out there are using Ionic as well. So if you think about the size of the App Store and how much they are growing every single year, this is a huge percentage. Ionic is powering all these apps, and people are very successful. Now, Ionic itself is split up internally roughly about 4 different pillars, right? We have this build, secure, connect, and deliver kind of mentality, but really we can think of it as our open source platforms and then our enterprise offerings for customers. Now, we're going to focus on the open source side of things because this is probably where people are going to be spending most of their time getting familiar with Ionic and getting familiar with the ecosystem. So let's dive into this. Now, if we think about the traditional development process, we probably have a project scope, comes down, and then gets split up amongst the different development teams, right? Your iOS dev team is going to be working in Swift, Xcode, and dealing with the iOS ecosystem. You'll have your native Android team that's going to be working with Java or Kotlin inside of Android Studio. Then you'll have your web team, trusty HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and they're going to be working with their various editors that they are familiar with, and then maybe a desktop team as well, which can be using a whole different set of tools. This is the typical development process that most people are probably going to be familiar with. Now, there's a lot of downsides to this approach, right? Each team is going to be siloed from one another. So as features get built out and different aspects are added to their apps, you're going to lose some feature parity across the product suite. So your iOS team might be able to add a new feature and your Android team might not be able to do that, as in the feature doesn't exist on the platform or they're just not sure how to do that. Same can go for the web and for the desktop. You're going to have code that is duplicated across all these platforms, basically throwing in a lot of time and money to develop an app multiple times. Really not a great process. Now, with Ionic, we try to simplify this entire process by giving you one streamlined flow of project scope, development team, and then having multiple outputs for the product. So your web development team can be using Ionic and Ionic's open source technologies, and they can develop an iOS app, an Android app, a mobile website, or even a desktop web app, all with the same code base, all with the same access to native features. Just write once, run anywhere. It really is that simple these days. So we have this SDK, but really it's divided into the app UI, the core native runtime, and then the underlying technologies there. This is where you can get this whole write once, run anywhere, and we like to call this web native, where the approach is you're building out your app using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That way your UI and your interactions are all happening using web technologies. When you need to go down and actually access native device features, we're going to provide those through JavaScript, so everything feels right at home for a web developer. And then when you need to go ahead and access, say, a native device feature, and maybe it's something that we don't support or it's something that's brand new, we should be able to give you hooks into that, so that way you could write the Swift code or write the Java and Kotlin code if you need to. Most likely you won't, though. So let's dive into that open source SDK and understand the building blocks here. So starting off, we have Ionic Framework. Now, this is packed with over 100 different components that you can use inside of your app. Everything starting off from the basic building blocks, what we call atoms, your little notification widgets, your buttons, your range sliders, toggles, checkbox, you name it, we have it. These components can be built up together with multiple other components to create something like a molecule component. We think about a card. A card is a very simple concept, but it is made up of a lot of little pieces. So we have a card image, card header, subtitle, what have you. These components can all be composed together to create much more complex UI element, and it's all done through web technology. They're mobile ready first, and so they're able to adapt to the smallest form factor and the least screen real estate, and then be able to adapt to the larger screens as the space becomes available. And what's key about these components is that they have this really nice adaptive design. So the design itself can not only adjust to the platform. So right now, if we're on iOS, it's going to look like iOS. And if we're on Android, it's going to look like an Android app. But they can also be completely customized to fit your own UI and design theme. Every app should have its own branding and its own design. And to do this, we provide a collection of CSS variables that you can tweak inside of your app to completely retheme how the app looks and feels inside of your project. Really, really awesome stuff. Now, once you have that app built out, you're going to want to access these native device features. And to do that, we have that project capacitor. Capacitor allows you to take your web app, deploy it to a native iOS runtime or a native Android runtime, and then access those native device features through JavaScript. We provide a collection of plugins or packages that will allow you to target, say, the file system, camera, or Bluetooth. And once you have that installed into your project, you now have access to those features and can go ahead and start to call them all through your TypeScript or JavaScript. Now, we have this split off into two different collections of packages or plugins. Official ones that we maintain, which include all of the what we consider core native functionality, geolocation, notifications, push notifications, what have you. And then there is a collection of community plugins that you can use for things that maybe don't make sense to exist in core, for things like Stripe payments or things like sign in with Apple. Various different plugins that you can use, and you can find it on the Capacitor community or anywhere on npm. You can use any of these plugins regardless of your knowledge of native technologies. So really, you can find a plugin, install it, and start calling these APIs without really having any knowledge of how the native technologies work. You really just need to know how JavaScript works. That's great. Then to kind of piece everything together and provide a very streamlined process, like I said, we have the Ionic CLI. Now the CLI is going to be something that everyone will use and can give you a project to get started with, or can build your project if you've already created one. So to get started, you can install the CLI with npm install-g at Ionic CLI, and then you can go ahead and start a brand new project. Now it could be an Angular, a React, or a Vue project. We'll go over all of those. And then you can pick from a bunch of different templates, things like a tabs-based interface, a side menu, or just a blank starter to get up and running. Once you have that project created, you can CD into it, open up your favorite editor, and then run Ionic Serve, and you're off to the races. This really simplifies the whole entire process of how you actually go ahead and build out a project and get that native access. So we're going to stop here real quick, and we're going to look at a demo. We're going to start to build out our project. We're going to be using some rich text editing. We're going to be using a file system API. We're going to be doing it from your favorite framework of choice. And then all of this is going to be deployed to not only iOS, but also to Android. So let's get over to my terminal and start right now. All right, so over here in my terminal, we're going to start to build an app using Ionic and using Capacitor to access, say, the file system. Let's go ahead and start off by installing the CLI and double checking to see if we already have it. So to do this, I'm going to double check by running Ionic-V, and I can see that I have the CLI installed. I have mine set up locally, so I'm going to ignore this update for now, but make sure that you are installing the latest version all the time. Now with this installed, I'm just going to run Ionic start, and we're going to see a prompt say, do you want to use the app creation wizard? I'm going to say no, and I'm going to pick Angular as my framework of choice. Now you can see we also have React and Vue support and links out to their official site. So let's go ahead and select Angular, and then we're going to give ours a name. I'm just going to call this temp ng, and then we're going to pick a starting template. So they all have a little description of what they are. A tabs is a simple tabs-based interface. A side menu is a project with a little side navigation draw. We have a blank, which is pretty self-explanatory. List, and then a guided template for this build your first app tutorial. We're going to pick blank, as we'll add everything else that we need along the way. And we're going to let this go ahead and install all of our dependencies. Now with our project created, let's go ahead and CD into temp ng, and then let's go ahead and open this up inside of our editor. Now this project is an Angular project. You can see we had the usual suspects We have an Angular JSON, which shows our project and has all the configuration that we need for our build system, for running our dev server, I18N, our testing and linting. But then we also have these two Ionic config and then capacitor config files. Now, the Ionic config is just going to tell our Ionic CLI how this project should be handled. We give it a name, we give it the integrations, in this case, capacitor, and then we give it a project type of Angular, so that way it knows to run Angular CLI commands under the hood. Now, the capacitor config file is going to hold all of the standard capacitor configuration that we might need. So this is going to give us our app ID, which is our reverse domain bundle ID, the actual app name, so what gets shown on the device when it's installed, where to get the web assets, and then if we should bundle the web runtime as well. Because we're using a build tool, we're not going to enable this, and we're just going to be able to export this out. From here, we can go into our source directory, and then we can take a look at the app folder. And then we can see it's a very standard Angular project. We have our app module where we have some declarations, imports, providers, and then we're bootstrapping this app component. Now, our app component really doesn't do anything at this point. We have our base component, which is loading up a router outlet instance from Ionic, which we'll go over in a minute. And then we have our home component as the actual route that is getting rendered. Now, this is going to show a lot more than what we probably need to know right now, but don't worry, we'll go over it. All you can see here is that we have this header, a toolbar, a title, and then some content in here that we're going to render out. Now, to fully see what this project actually looks like, let's go ahead and we're going to open up a new terminal instance, and we're going to run our first Ionic CLI command. We're going to run Ionic serve, and this is going to start up our Angular dev server. You can see we have a few different warnings coming in here. This is pretty standard stuff, so nothing really to worry about. But it's going to go ahead and start to bundle up our app and prepare it for our dev server. So we can see over here, we have it running inside of our browser. We can see this little header bar. We can see our main content area. So let's do a quick little window management. And then we're going to just focus on this homepage for a little bit to understand what we have going on. So we have our header. We can see that it's using this property that we can touch on in a little bit, but you can see we have title, our toolbar and title. So if we change blank to say home, we can save this, and then it'll automatically refresh the browser page with the new content. We have the second header in here, which is maybe a little confusing, but again, don't worry, we're going to show what this does. And then we have the content that we are rendering out in the center of our app. So we have ready to create an app and a link out to our component doc. So let's delete that for now, save, and then we can start to customize the content that we have being rendered in here. So with the content that we have in here, we have these other headers and then some properties that we're setting on our components that don't seem pretty clear what they're doing. So let's go over to our browser, and then we're going to come up to our menu, and we're going to switch the user agent to mimic, say, an iPhone. It's a quick way to just mimic a certain device type, and you can see, well, our title's different now. Now, this is an example of a component that only works in a certain mode. For example, we have our header here inside of our content, and then it's set to collapse equals condense. This is to mimic how iOS's large title and header system works. So we can come in here, we can change this to home. We're going to update to show the new title, and just for our illustration, we're going to have, say, 100 paragraph tags, and we're going to render this out. Now we should be able to scroll. Let's add some content in there. Item. And let's see if I can remember our emit syntax. 100. There we go. Let's save. So we have a whole bunch of items in here, and we can see as we start to scroll, the other title and other header become visible. The actual experience with this on a mobile device is seamless compared to how native iOS does this. So let's go ahead and clean this up and get rid of our placeholder content and just start developing the app and actually including more components in here. Now, to start off, we're going to actually go ahead and include a list of items inside of our app. So we're going to use a few components that can help with this. So we'll have an Ion list, and then inside of this, we're going to have an Ion item. And just to make sure that we are doing things pretty dry, let's say we'll do star ng4, and then we're going to get let item of 0, 1, 2, 3. We'll just do a quick little inline array here. And then inside of this, we'll just say item. And it's going to render the item that we're iterating over. We can save. And here we have our 4 items being rendered out to the screen. Now, what's really great about here is that we can pass in all these items and potentially route to a new page that can show us details about all of these different items. So to do that, we're going to make use of a feature inside of Angular called generators. And this is going to generate a new route for us. And we can do this with Ionic G, and we're going to give it a page that we want to generate. And this is going to be called, we'll call it edit for now. And then we'll add some features onto this extra afterwards. So we'll say Ionic G page edit. We'll go ahead and hit enter, and it's going to generate a bunch of different components for us, as well as update the routing module for our project. So back inside of our editor, let's take a look at what we got. We have this edit component right here. It has all of the details that it needs, and then we're going to come up to our routing component, and you can see we have edit over here, which is going to load up that module. And let's go ahead and duplicate this for now, and we're going to give it a dynamic slug where we're just going to pass in an ID at a later point in time. So we should be able to navigate to this without any parameter, but we should also be able to pass in a parameter. So let's try this out. So on our Ion item, let's go ahead and add a router link, and then we're going to pass in an array and pass in this edit route as where we should navigate to. So we'll hit save. And then you can see inside of our app itself that we got these new little arrows that are pointing to now we can see inside of the app itself, we had these little icons added to indicate that this is clickable, and we can click on our 0 and we can go to edit, and we get that nice transition to the new page, and then we can go back. But if we go back using the browser buttons, we don't have any transitions or any animations happening. So let's fix that. We're going to open up the edit page HTML, and we're going to start to modify this header component. So inside of here, we have our toolbar. We're going to add a component called Ion Buttons. Now, Ion Buttons is a container component, which allows us to pass in a collection of buttons, and it's going to lay these out in a horizontal manner. So we can say, let's add an Ion back button, and then we're going to give it a default href, which is going to say, hey, if we land on this edit page and there's no other route to go back to in history, here's where we should go back to. And for this, we can just say set it to a basically the root, and it will automatically update that to home. So let's go ahead and save this. And then we're going to come over here and then click on the 0. And we can see that we have not only the back button, we can have that nice transition from the previous title into the back button. And then when we click back, that transition happens automatically. Now, there's something else we should do here to make sure that we are lining everything up in their appropriate spot. And that is to use this slot property to tell the Ion buttons where it should render with inside our Ion toolbar. So we'll say Ion buttons, the slot is going to equal start, meaning that in a left to right context or direction for our HTML, it's going to show up on this left side. But if we were in, say, a right to left, it should show up on the right side because that is the starting position. And we can see how this works by setting the Ion back button's location to end. We'll save again, and then we'll start our animation. And you can see that the back button now shows up at the end. So it's going to be on the right in left to right, and on the left in right to left. So let's go back and change that to start again, and then save to update our app. Now, we had added a dynamic portion to this edit page, but right now we're not passing in any of those properties to our route. So let's go ahead and let's add those back to this Ion item. So inside here, let's do a quick little format. And we're going to edit our router link, and we're going to pass in the item inside of our URL. So we'll go here, and let's double check this by going to 0, and we should see, yep, edit/0 being passed in. And to confirm, let's go into 2, and here we are passing in 2. So everything's working as expected. Let's go ahead and start to get access to this information inside of the edit page. So back into the edit page, we'll go ahead and let's just render something inside of our HTML that says the current ID is, and then we're going to add our double curlies, and we're going to say, we're going to have a parameter in here called ID. Now, if we go to the edit page.ts, now we can start to access that information. So we're going to first import from Angular router. And this is going to give us access to all the router information. And we're going to grab the active route or activated route. And we're going to inject that into our constructor. So we'll say private route is activated route. Now, from inside this activated route, we can go ahead and say const ID equals this.route dot snapshot to get the current value, and then we'll say params or params map dot get, and we're going to pass in the ID. Now, with this ID, we're going to go ahead and set a property. So instead of doing const, let's actually just say we'll have a public member here called ID. It's going to be a string, and we'll just leave that as is. And then we can say this.id is going to equal params.get. Now let's check out what this type information is. String or null. Okay, so we can say string or null, and then figure out what's going on over here. ID has an initializer assigned in the constructor, and we can say this is just going to be null for now, and get TypeScript to cooperate. So let's go ahead and save. We can come over to our app, and let's go ahead and click 2 again. Now, let's also make sure that we save our edit page, and let's click 2 again. You can see the current ID is 2 is in here. Go to 3, current ID is 3. So this is all being wired up correctly. So while our project is working right now, we're not accessing any of the cool native device features or having any rich text editing that we said we were going to add. So let's go ahead and fix that. We're going to come down here to our terminal and we're going to install a few packages. So first we're going to install ngxquil, and then we're also going to install capacitor file system into our project. Now, ngxquil is an Angular adaptation of the Quil.js library, and capacitor file system is capacitor's approach to exposing the file system through JavaScript. So let's go ahead and let those install. With that installed, let's go over to our app.module, and then we're going to import from ngxquil, and then we're going to import the Quil module from this package. Now, inside of the imports array, we're going to add a Quil module.forRoot, and then let's do a quick little bit of formatting, and then we can save, and we have Quil.js set up inside of our app. Now, for the file system portion of this, let's go over to our home page, and we're going to import from @capacitor, and we're going to import from the file system. Now, to do this, we are going to bring in the file system itself. We're going to bring in the directory enum, and then what should be all we need for this. Now from here, to get access to the file system, we need to do a little setup work. So first, we're going to add this little no-op function, and this is just going to let us handle null cases where we just don't want a promise to do anything. And then inside of here, we're going to add this new field into our homepage. This is going to be a member called notes, and it's going to be a file system info array, so an array of files that we're going to render out. And then we can start to access the file system. So what we'll start off by doing is adding this async ng-on-await, and then we're going to call filesystem.requestPermissions. Now, file system request permissions is going to let the native devices actually prompt the users to either allow or reject permissions, so we can handle this appropriately inside of our app. And then once we get that permission back, we can go ahead and call this init file system, which we're going to add right here. Now the init file system is going to call this makedir function, and then we're going to just no-op out of the promise. Once we have that makedir, we're going to also then call readdir to actually read the directory that we're going to create. So let's go ahead and do that makedir function. So all this is going to be an async function, and we're going to call the file system.makedir method. This is going to let us pass in a directory and then a prefix path, basically making this file for us. And if it doesn't exist, don't worry about it. It's already there. Now, once that directory has been created, we're going to go ahead and we're going to read from it. So inside of here, we're going to say files are going to be this file system.readdir, passing in that directory of documents again, and then the prefix. And then once we get those files, we're going to set our notes property to this files.sort method, and we're just going to do a real simple sort of all of the files inside of our directory. So let's go ahead and save this. And then we're going to go over to our homepage template. And then instead of iterating over all of these array methods, we're just going to iterate over notes. And then we'll rename item to note of notes. And then inside of here, we'll just render the note.name. And then instead of passing in item, we'll pass in note.name as well. and then we will save, and then we have no notes being saved or displayed inside of our app. And that makes sense because we don't have any notes being created. So let's go back to our editor, and inside of this toolbar, we're going to add a buttons. In this case, we're just going to say slot equals end, and then we're going to create a button. And then inside of this, we're going to add a click handler. Or actually, no, we'll just add a router link. And we're going to link to edit with no parameter afterwards. And we're going to add the text new. So now we're going to be able to add a new note in here, and then we're going to be able to save it inside of our file system. Now let's go ahead and start to work on this edit page. Now we have nothing in here but the current ID, and that's set to null from our initial example. But let's go ahead and start to add in our rich text editor. So we'll go to the edit page module, and then we're going to import from Quill.js, and because this is Angular, we're going to add the Quill module into our imports just to get access to this, and then we're going to go to the edit page.ts and start to add in the Quill.js configuration. Now, the first thing that we need to do inside of here to configure Quill.js is pass in this modules member. Now, the modules are going to go ahead and tell Quill.js what features that we want to add. So in this case, we're going to add the toolbar, we're going to add the headers with 1 through 6, and then bold, italic, underline, strike, some lists, indents, +1 or -1, pretty standard stuff. We'll save. And then inside of edit page.html, we're going to get rid of the current ID bit, and we're going to add this Quill editor, and then we're going to pass in this modules property and set that to our modules that we just set inside of our component class. So when we save, so now that we saved, you can see our editor is trying to show, but it doesn't look 100%. To fix this, we're going to go to our global.scss, where we have all of the Ionic utility styles, and we're going to add a few more colors in, or a few more styles in here. We're going to import the core themes from Quill.js, as well as some base styles that are going to fit for our app. So let's go ahead and save this, and then we can see our editor starting to look more like an actual editor. So hello from the demo, and this all looks to be working appropriately. Now, the only thing that we don't have here is if we were to reload, we lose all of those changes that we made to our editor. So let's go in and see how we can edit this to actually save all of our content. So to save something inside of our editor, let's go over to our class, and then below our ng on init, let's go ahead and add a function called save. And inside of this function, we're going to do const file name, and it's going to equal a notes. And we're going to just do a quick little date.now, and then we'll just add .txt to the end of this. Now, with this done, we can say await file system dot write file, and then this is more or less like what we had when we want to read a file. So inside of here, we'll say the path is going to be notes, and then we're going to pass in file name, and then our data is going to be something that we'll set up later, but it's going to be this dot content, or nothing if we don't actually add any content. And then the directory is going to be directory.documents. And then the encoding is going to be encoding.utf8. With all of this together, let's go ahead and add the content. So we'll declare property of content, and then we will save. And then inside of the edit page itself, we'll just set the ng model to be content, and we'll fix this little bit right here. So that way, when we save, we'll be able to bind the content to our class member, and then we'll be able to save that. Inside of the toolbar, we're going to add another Ion buttons, and this time we're going to add the slot to end, and then we're going to add another Ion button called save, and when you click on this, it will call save, allowing us to write any of the content here to the file system. The last little bit that we need to do here is inside of our edit page, we need to be able to have a way to go back once the file has been saved. So to do this, we'll call this.router.pop. Now, router is not something that we've set up, so let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to inject something into our component called router, and this is going to be Ion router outlet. Now, this is going to be the router outlet that sits at the base of our component. So whenever we call this, we can call the navigation methods on top of it. So we'll save, and then we'll go over to our editor. We'll go back. Let's hit new. We'll say hello world, and then we'll click save, and then we'll be able to navigate back. The only thing we can't see now is the note that we just saved. To fix this, we'll go to our home page, and instead of using ng on init, we're going to use an Ionic lifecycle method. We'll use ion view did enter. And to explain the difference between these two, ng on init is only ever going to fire once a component has been created. Because of the way Ionic's routing system works, we actually are never destroying components when we navigate away from them. So ng on init is going to be great for something that is only going to fire once. But if we want to make sure that this ties into whenever a component is navigating in and out of the current view, we should be using the Ionic lifecycle hooks. So in this case, we're going to use ion view did enter to say when the animation and the view have completed becoming the active view, go ahead and call all this stuff. So we'll save this file, and we'll have our notes loaded up. We can go to a new note, say test2. We'll click save, and then we'll see the new note appear automatically. So let's wrap up and get back into our slides and finish up this webinar. Awesome. Now, we've just gone over the very basics of how to get started with Ionic and its open source stacks. What about these other pillars that Ionic tries to focus on? What about secure? Well, our secure platform involves three different aspects: Ionic authentication, storage, and biometrics. We like to refer to these as the security trifecta, which includes a whole flow of how you can authenticate securely, use biometric features to authenticate and authorize users, and then secure that information on your device using our secure storage offering. All these combined together really are, a triple threat of how you can properly secure and authenticate your users inside of your app. For the Connect, we're going to look at how we can, utilize other different services that exist outside of Ionic. For example, say you wanted to use Couchbase Lite, Apple Pay, Google Pay, or whatever. We have gone through and created a bunch of different components and packages that you can integrate with your app to make sure that you can call these different services all from your TypeScript or your JavaScript. Um, Really, there shouldn't be any more that you need to do. We can take care of a lot of this integration for you and make sure that you're just having to call the correct package. And now you can connect to Couchbase Lite or Apple Pay, what have you. And then the last of these pillars is the deliver. It's not enough that you have to build your app. What can we do to help you deliver this app to your users? And like I said, that includes our CI/CD service that we call AppFlow. Now, AppFlow is tailor-made specifically for mobile apps, and so it's going to feel familiar enough for folks who have used other more generic CI/CD tools, but offer a lot of functionality that is only going to be applicable to a mobile app. So you can go ahead, you can have your app get built on every single commit, but then go ahead and take that build and generate a native binary. That binary can be downloaded and shared in various different places like TestFlight or Google Beta, or you can go ahead and have that be deployed to your users through our deploy feature. All this together gives you a pretty awesome experience and a pretty seamless development experience from building your app to shipping it to your users. Now, closing out, we're inviting you all to just be a part of our community. We have a huge presence all over the world with tons of developer communities existing in, say, London, Amsterdam, or right here in the US. Join these meetup groups or join our developer community inside of the forum or Discord. Ask some questions on Stack Overflow or our forum, or if you're inclined to, answer some questions. We'd love to have people be involved in helping one another. So if you want to join our forum, you can check out forum.ionicframework.com. That'll be our main hub for asking and answering questions. If you want to join the Discord, you can check out this link right here. Discord will be our main chat platform where you can ask us and interact with the community in a pretty relaxed way. And then if you want to know more about Ionic, you can go ahead and check out ionic.io/docs, and that'll teach you everything that you need to know about the Ionic platform. So let's hand it over and start going over some questions.